Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait for some people to join, but really delighted that you've come along to this webinar, which is going to be, I think, absolutely fantastic. It's very, very kind of timely at the moment, I think, when people are saying about how pressurized everyone is, how people's mental health is really suffering, and our productivity in the country is going down. So how can we square the fact of well-being and performance and productivity? And that's what the debate's going to be about. I'm William Bird. I'm a CEO of Intelligent Health. That's an organization that we work with corporates in dealing with well-being, but we also deliver a game called Beat the Street into communities, where we've reached over 2 million people in binding communities together. And a lot of the principles of that we put into the workplace as well. I'm also a GP and a bit of an academic down in the University of Exeter, but my main work is here. I'd love to now introduce Claire. Claire, can you tell us who you are and what you're doing, and then we'll hear a lot more from you later.
Thank you, William. Yes, I'm Claire, and I help organisations create cultures where people are able to thrive and perform at their best. I have I've got a background in learning and development leadership consultancy, and I used to work in-house at Burberry leading their global wellbeing strategy, and now work with mainly global large organisations, including clients like Burberry, KPMG, Warner Brothers Discovery, Channel 4, Harry Potter Studios, looking at leadership and the ways in which it's not just about creating policies and handbooks. It's actually about what are those behaviors that we need to be role modeling and showing that then shift culture to help improve well-being and performance overall.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. And Luke.
Thank you, William. Hi, everybody. So my name's Luke. I work for Atlassian Williams Racing as Employee Experience Lead. I always say this when I introduce myself. For those of you who know Formula One, you probably need no introduction into what Atlassian Williams Racing do. For those of you who aren't into Formula One, it's as simple as every other weekend or so, cars go round in a circle, and Atlassian Williams Racing try to make their car the fastest. I've taken a bit of a squiggly career path over time. Worked in various sort of client-facing roles, but developed a real passion for well-being, culture, inclusion over the years. So for the last 5 years or so, have been working in employee experience specifically. And I've been with Williams for just over a year, and I'll share a little bit more about my initiation into the world of elite sports in a few minutes' time.
And just as Luke arrives, of course, Williams start to do really well. So we know purely because of Luke's work, it's making a difference. So listen to what Luke says, because he's very
William has said it now, so you don't have to, Luke.
Love it.
Great. So what I might just do initially is perhaps to explain how my journey into this, why aren't I a GP just giving out statins, taking blood pressures, seeing people with all their illnesses, why am I doing all of this? And I think where I've come from general practice and still do it, is because I feel health is so much more on the well-being side of things. Healthcare really doesn't even touch it. So I'm just going to go through some of the science, some of the background to why this may be happening, and then hopefully when you hear from Claire and Luke, you'll be able to say, well, there's some logic behind it, from the brain point of view and from us as a human. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to tell you that we are animals. We haven't shifted away from being an animal, and all animals like to feel safe. They like to feel valued so that they can get higher up the pecking order for resources, and find a good mate. And also you want to belong, and particularly humans. So a massive drive for us to honestly collaborate. And if we don't get those three things, we drift away, and our body is desperately trying to pull us back again because it creates a stress. So if you don't have enough water, you become thirsty, and that drives you to drink more water. If you're hungry, or if you don't have food, you become hungry, and that drives you to get more food. When we don't feel safe or valued or belong, we have a sensation of stress, which is the only reason that stress is to pull us back again to feeling safe again or valued or belong. So the further we drift away, the more that stress builds up. And as that stress builds up, we change into a different type of person or an animal. No longer are we nice and comfortable with other people around us and can concentrate on things and have that kind of low pulse rate and trust people and all those things which happen when we're in our parasympathetic nervous system, as part of our nervous system in charge of the low pulse rate. But we go into the, as we know, the fight and flight, and that's the sympathetic. And that does change everything. Suddenly our emotions are there for survival. And if you're in a survival mode, you actually don't want to be too close to people because you don't quite trust them, because they could be the enemy, they could be someone else. So we start to lose trust. And in fact, the oxytocin, which causes trust, drops when we're stressed. We also then start to get a feeling of our brain gets shut down because that uses up loads of energy and we've only got a certain amount of energy. So we stop using the frontal part of our brain, which means our rational change goes and we don't concentrate so much. We can't focus on things. And then we start to move in for actually not being more active because we're trying to conserve calories because the survival is always about that. And then our sleep changes because we don't want to be open to attack. So we go into a light sleep. Our diet changes because we want as many calories as possible. So we can see that as we move into this stress, our body and our emotions of anger and anxiety to try and avoid danger and things, they all shift, but they're all protected. They're all there for a reason. So we think we're becoming unwell in that respect, but actually the body's doing exactly what it's designed to do. Put us in a workplace, and as we'll hear later from Luke and Claire, that's not the ideal place. If you don't trust people and you can't concentrate and you're getting tired all the time because the body's trying to conserve energy all the time, that's not a great way of doing performance. So we have to get our body back again to feeling that safe and valued and belong. And if we do that, then our stress levels will drop and we'll start to feel better again. And our body shifts back again to being driven by our parasympathetic, the vagus nerve. So there's a little bit of a sciencey side, and there's over the years, research has really been piling on that kind of knowledge and understanding, particularly the brain. You know, we now know there are a few cells in the brain, if I get really nerdy here, in the hypothalamus that drives our motivation to be active. And when we're stressed, they get switched off. Because why do you want to expend unnecessary energy at the gym? You might want to know why go to the gym in the first place, but if you do, you find motivation really hard when you're stressed. That's your body protecting yourself. It's not you just being weaker or just having no discipline. So what we'll hear, I think now, is to show that actually performance and well-being are two sides of the same coin. Because if we can get away from that stress and feel trusting, etc., we'll start to feel all that energy we're using up for fight and flight will be converted into growth and repair, and we'll start to get better. So that's what I really want to do. And as a doctor, it really means that actually what I'm doing in patching up illnesses, if I can get a bit further upstream to the physical activity and sleep, that's great. But if I go further upstream to try and get people to feel much better, so much more effect. And it's, I think, a really exciting journey. So, Claire, given all of that, you've been working, you've had that experience yourself. Tell us more about that and also how you've applied what you now know and also from your life story, how you've made that into the corporate world and the difference you feel you can make.
Yeah, sure. I think, and it's great to have you explain some of that stuff, because over many years, building an understanding of what my body and all of our bodies is doing when we're under pressure, when we're feeling in survival mode, and what we can do to help ourselves get out of survival mode has made a huge difference to my own mental health. And I think just has such a strong impact when it comes to cultures and teams. So a lot of the work that I do is very much built on the foundation of understanding what is happening physiologically in our bodies, what happens when we're in survival mode, when we're under stress and we don't feel safe, and what can we do to come out of that, and actually how much better we can be in terms of performance, in terms of connection, innovation. There's just so many benefits to not being constantly in survival mode, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in terms of my journey and how I got here, as I said, I've my whole career, I did a degree in psychology, and I've always worked in learning and development leadership in consultancies, but I was more on the client management side. And for the first half of my career, I worked very, very long hours. I didn't have any sort of sense of work-life balance. I didn't have any sense of how to set boundaries because it is all I'd ever known. I'd went into my first job out of university. I tell a lie, the first job out of university, we were very, very lazy in, but the second one, like my first proper job where I sort of knuckled down, I was working extremely long hours, would often be working, till 3 in the morning. I was kind of my early 20s and I didn't really know anything different. And that continued with my career. And I never even really thought about what else I wanted. It was just, this is the next step. This is what I've got to do. I was always felt on the verge of burnout. I drank very heavily. It was always about just being in survival mode and keeping going. And for one of my jobs, I moved out to Singapore to set up the Asia arm of the business. And I would be working, Singapore is depending on the time difference, is 7 or 8 hours ahead of the UK. And often people in the UK would be going home before I was finished. So I was just like constantly never stopping. And very sadly, when I was out in Singapore, my mum died quite suddenly. And I was traveling back to the UK, and I thought it was a to be honest, quite cliched like moment where I went, what on earth am I doing with my life? I The last time I spent with the last time I spent with my mum, I cried on her shoulder because I was so stressed out about work. And now she's gone, and is this really what I want to be doing with my life? And speaking to a therapist and being able to kind of understand a bit more about that, she said to me, "Isn't success just being happy?" And as strange as it sounds, I had never really thought of success like that. It was getting to the next level, getting that next job title. It was proving yourself to your, senior people, getting that next kind of salary increase. And it really helped me step away and think about what I really wanted from life. So I left that role. I went traveling for a bit, and I came back and started to think about what I really wanted to do. And that led me to where I am now, which is, how do you prioritize? Work doesn't have to be. For so many people, the automatic standard is that work sucks and you recover from it afterwards, and you just kind of do it until you can not do it anymore. And it doesn't need to be like that. Work can be hard. There can be, it can take time and it can take effort, but it doesn't have to be something that just automatically is the worst part of your life. And how can I help organizations to be able to do that? And I think that with the pandemic and COVID, there was a great uplift in organizations thinking about how they could support their people. But you have so many challenges when it comes to budgets, demands, being able to perform under pressure. And it's thinking about, how do you actually create an environment that isn't just about well-being perks? Okay, let's offer this app, or let's offer these training sessions, because those can be nice additional things, but they are the cherry on top of a cake. And if the cake is rotten, then that cherry doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't help. So what can we actually be doing within the culture to make sure that day-to-day people are experiencing what you perhaps are saying in your job adverts that your culture is? Perhaps you're saying that we feel this and we're inclusive and we support people, but actually, what does it mean? What does that look like day to day? And when it comes to performance, when we put our people in survival mode, with all you can do is focus on survival mode. That's your top priority, right? So you're not necessarily going to be at your best when it comes to collaborating with people. You're going to be seeing other people as a threat. You're going to be not making the best decisions. You're going to be very reactive. And I think that often when we put so much pressure and demands on people and we don't create a safe environment, then people are always in survival mode and they're never at their best. They're never performing to the full of their potential. So what are some of the things that you can do to actually create that difference? And one of the things is being able to understand what a survival mode culture looks like versus what a performance culture looks like. And when you're scanning for threats, you're protecting each other, people are having more arguments, they're clashing heads, having more conflict than normal, perhaps being really reactive, which then causes problems and issues further down the line. But when people are out of survival mode, when they're able to be thinking more from a performance perspective, when you're not having all that adrenaline or that cortisol running through your body, and you're able to actually be thinking a bit more clearly and thinking about how you can innovate, how you can collaborate, how you can be at your best, then you're going to be building that trust. There's going to be that psychological safety, which I can talk a bit more about in a minute. People are more likely to share ideas. You're not trying to compete against each other. You're trying to collaborate and succeed as a team rather than hiding each other's ideas or even hiding your mistakes. A lot of that comes through when you're not feeling psychologically safe, is that you say, oh God, I'm just not going to tell anyone about this mistake because I'd rather that no one knew about it because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to have the challenge of people telling me off or me being in trouble from that. And then also people feeling safe to perhaps take calculated risks, be more creative, try new things. So what is it that we can do to shift that? There's a couple of things that I think are really important. One of them I'm going to lean into you more, Luke, because that's about the kind of the peaks and troughs of, you have to really perform at a high level, but then how do you consciously, intentionally rest? Because I think often we expect everyone to work at 110% all the time, and then we're shocked when people burn out and take long periods of sick. But the other two I'll talk about a little bit more, which is how do you create a more psychologically safe culture? And how do you do that from a leadership perspective? How do you do it from a communications perspective? And often when you're creating a survival culture, you're being really inconsistent with your communications. So people don't know where they stand. Everything feels really ambiguous. People feel anxious. Expectations are always shifting. So people, once again, don't know where they stand, don't know what they should be doing. Toxic leadership, perhaps leaders saying one thing, behaving in another way, creating unnecessary conflict. Lack of psychological safety, so people not feeling like it's okay to make mistakes, not feeling like it's okay to speak up, to challenge the status quo. Constant urgency. I know that in so many organizations, it's that urgency culture. Even when things aren't urgent, we're so used to saying this has to be done tomorrow, we need to do this straight away, that we don't actually step back and say what really needs to be done now and what could be deprioritized. I'm a big believer in actively not thinking about what are your priorities, thinking about what are your depriorities, what can you strip out and take away. And then that blame culture, who's to blame, how do we find out who's to blame, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again, rather than going, what can we learn from this, how can we build, how can we grow? So how do you shift that? Being much more clear in your communications, having that healthy leadership and role modeling, embracing diverse perspectives. We often have so many different types of thoughts, brains, ways of working in our organizations, but often we only celebrate or we only reward certain types of thinking, which is often the people who are quite extroverted, think out loud, are active thinkers, and they're often the people that speak up in meetings, are able to be visible to senior leadership. And it's like, actually, how can we be more embracing different types of neurodivergent, different types of thinking, introversions? There's so many different skills that I think we often don't leverage by not having that diversity. That periods of intensity and rest, which we can talk about a bit more, Luke, and it being much more of a growth mindset culture. So what did we learn from this? How do we celebrate our mistakes? How do we make sure that we aren't expecting everyone to be perfect, and then making people feel that they aren't able to admit when they're not, when we're all human beings, and actually so much of the time we just aren't perfect. And then another point that I'll make, and then I will stop rambling on, and I'll ask you some questions, Luke, is that overload. As organizations, we often have such an overload, and I think the bigger the organization gets, the more overload we have, the more catch-ups you need to have, the more communications you need to be having. Have you ever seen those like diagrams when it shows you the number of people? And once there's about 5 people in your organization, the number of ways in which you need to be connecting with each other, it gets really quite overwhelming. So as soon as you're hitting, hundreds and thousands within your organization, it becomes that there is so much noise and so much, frankly, nonsense that happens in organizations that creates overload, meetings that are unnecessary, urgency that is unnecessary, so many comms platforms. I have worked in organizations where I'm thinking, I spend half of my time checking Teams and then Yammer and then my emails and then my WhatsApp to make sure that I'm not missing anything, that I haven't actually done any work. I'm just constantly checking to make sure I'm not missing stuff. People micromanaging you, shifting those priorities, it being so unclear what your roles and responsibilities are, having to join meetings for meeting's sakes. There being no kind of criteria in terms of what is it we're actually trying to achieve and what are priorities. And it's okay to say, this isn't a priority right now and we're going to deprioritize it. So what can we do around clearing out some of that noise? And that's something that I am very passionate about, because I think that a lot of the time, one of the things that stifles performance, creativity, growth, and really impacts people's overall well-being is the fact that they have so much crap clogging up their day, meeting after meeting after meeting, then trying to do all your work in the evening, or getting pulled into things, delivering projects that then at the end they get sent to someone else and they go, oh, we've changed direction, we're not doing this anymore. So it's actually about how do you streamline some of that stuff. And even if that is just starting with going, we're going to look at our meeting culture, and is there, by looking at some of the criteria, are there meetings that we can strip out? Do we really need to have this weekly meeting? Is this actually bringing value, or is it something that we're just having out of habit? And how can we get people's time back? So the two things that, to kind of summarize there, is about what do we do to make sure that we aren't creating more uncertainty, more stress in the system that puts our people into survival mode? Because when you're in survival mode, your priority is to survive. It's not to do great in your job. It's not to be nice to your colleagues. It's to survive. And your body, hormonally, it's telling you not to go to the gym. It's telling you to eat, high calorie food. It's telling you to rest, and it's telling you to not trust the people around you. So nobody's going to be at their best when they're in survival mode. So what can you do to shift that? And then also, what can you do to declog the system, to reduce some of this noise that means that people then, A, are in less of a survival mode because they're less overwhelmed, but also have space for all of that stuff they want to do, to be able to learn, to be able to grow, to be able to just have an opportunity to think, is there a better way of doing this? Is there things that we can do more of that are going to help us be innovative, ahead of the competition, are going to be able to just take us to that next level instead of just treading water and surviving all the time. So if we think about that sort of third point in terms of the highs and the lows, it would be great, I think, Luke, if you can chime in here a bit about what is it that you think, working for an organization where it's really, really obvious you have highs and lows, right? If you work in finance, perhaps end of the tax year is going to be a high, and then perhaps you're going to you almost have this. And as the season gets longer and longer, it feels like it just means that every 2 weeks for the whole year, it's up and then it's down. But how do you make sure that it's more intentionally down rather than just up, 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 up? And how do you balance that? And what are some of the insights that people might be able to take for any culture, for any organization?
Sure, thanks, Claire. Really good question, and you're right. It feels pretty relentless. It probably looks pretty relentless from out to in, and admittedly, it feels it from in to out as
Yeah.
well. And I always caveat when we're talking about peaks and troughs, people tend to think of what you see on TV, so the drivers and the mechanics in the garage, because they're the ones that are going between weekends, and it's peak every 2 weeks, and then you might have a bit of a dip in between. But actually, that's represented throughout the team. So you've got 1,100 people based back at the factory in Oxfordshire, who go through the same process, either for a race weekend or for whatever project they're working on. So I naively, for example, when I joined Williams, thought that when the season finishes in December, everybody has 2 months of you know, relaxation, rest, you celebrate the season that's gone, and you sort of start preparing for the next one, when actually a
Pop the
large
cars
chunk,
in the garage, just like lock the door.
exactly, everyone goes on a winter sun holiday. But the reality is that the folk who are based back at the factory, that is their busiest time of year. Between November and February, they are building the 2026 as it will be car, and that is the most intense by far period for them. So actually, there's never a moment in the organization where everyone is quiet. Yes, between seasons, that might be when the drivers are off having a lovely 5-star holiday in the Maldives. But that's not reflected throughout the team. So I always caveat the peaks and troughs. It's different populations who need it at different times. And I think you have to start with the elite athlete mentality. So if you look at a Keely Hodgkinson, for example, or a Mo Farah, if they trained at 100% all the way through the week and the months in between major events, when they arrived at the World Championships or the Olympics, they would be way off their best because they'd be totally burnt out. They build intentional high quality recharge and rest and recovery into their admittedly elite intense training exercise, and that's the same approach we try to take at Williams. So we know for a fact that if you operate at 100% or 120%, if you're talking sort of working hours, as you spoke about so powerfully, Claire, you know for a fact that the quality of your output will do this. So your input might stay up here, but your quality of output will go down here. Whereas someone who's operating at 100% down to 75, up to 110, down to 60, and rides that bell curve of, you know, comfort, stretch, strain when you're over the other side. If you can rock between those things over the course of 12 months, then you eventually end up in that sweet spot of high performance. And I think the risk is that people spend too long in the strain. You know, you've tipped over the edge of the bell curve, and then once you're there, it's very, very hard to rock back. So you end up plummeting all the way back down to burnout and beyond. So yeah, we try and talk about it, we try and encourage it, and ultimately we try and unlock it, because there's telling people you need to do that, and then there's the cynical eye roll of, oh well, that's great in practice, but how do we make it work in reality? And I can talk a little bit about how we've done that, but really, really critical that you build in those high recharge moments.
And I think the point that you're making about the fact that the input stays the same, but the kind of outputs go down. So you could be working at, say, 110%, and then you don't stop. So it's still as exhausting, but you're not getting as good a result. And that's often like a really strong sign of burnout, where it's like you're putting in as much effort, but actually you're not getting the results, and you're making mistakes, and you're not performing in the way that you should have. I often think about burnout like credit cards, and you might put something on a credit card and then you can pay it off, but you put too much on that credit card and suddenly you're kind of drowning in this debt that you can't get out of. And that's often where you're sort of taking energy from the future. And you can do that a bit, but then you need time to be able to sort of pay that debt off. And if you are always living above your means, then there's some point where that all kind of implodes. And it's like, how do you make sure that you have time to pay back into that debt? Whether that is scientifically, medically accurate, William, I don't know, but it's kind of I often think it's so easy to get into debt and so hard to get out of it. And it's kind of almost really easy to steal all that energy, but then to recover from something like burnout takes so much work, and takes so much time to be able to actually do.
Yeah, and
I love. Go on, Will. I was just going to say quickly that analogy of the credit card I really enjoy, but you can almost make it really stark for people. So I often find they call it the zone of delusion, I think, when you're in that burnout zone and you feel like the only way out of burnout, the way you're feeling, is to work harder. So instead of thinking I'm gonna really strip back and relax, you think I'm just gonna chuck more and more energy at this to try and feel better. So in your credit card analogy, I love that, and you can almost build on it by saying the equivalent is trying to get out of debt by spending more. That's what people do when they're in the burnout zone, when they're expending more energy. So I might start using that internally to bring it to
Yeah.
life in a very real way.
And there is something quite, I feel like you get into quite an addictive cycle when you're in burnout. I'm neurodivergent, so I've got ADHD, and typically neurodivergent people are much more susceptible to get into burnout. So I often go through periods of burnout, and one of the real signs for me is when I'm like, I cannot actually step away from my work. It's like I've got to do more. I've got to keep going and keep ahead, because the idea of stopping and trying to rest, it's like I can't disconnect from it. It's too stressful to even step away from my work, which obviously is counterintuitive and is gonna make you feel a lot worse, but you kind of can't help it and you get into that cycle. I had a question for you. We were talking about the peaks and the troughs, and I I really buy into the concept and the idea of it. But what's the challenge when it comes to perhaps convincing people who are a bit more cynical about that? I sometimes hear leaders saying, I mean, not great leaders, but I do hear people saying, "Oh, if my team aren't a bit scared, or are they on a bit like at that kind of edge of pressure, then actually I don't think they do perform well." Or
Yeah.
we haven't got the space for that. That's lovely in an ideal world. If we had loads of people and loads of budget, we could do that. But actually, we've got a lean team. Like, what are some of the things that you think are helpful at convincing stakeholders around this stuff?
Yeah, great question, Claire. And I think I could tackle that in two parts. So there's the cynical sort of senior stakeholder element, and
Yeah,
then there's the cynical middle ground, the people you're likely to come up against when
yeah.
when you've been given the green light to talk about this stuff. So starting with senior stakeholders, I think at Williams, it's probably been the most challenging I've experienced, and I've put together wellbeing strategies for a few organisations, and it's probably been the most challenging here. However, the common pushbacks and cynicisms are the same. They're just slightly more
Yeah.
pronounced, I would say, in an elite sport environment, and that is because I think people assume, and this isn't everybody, of course, there are nuances in opinions and attitudes, but people assume that there is no space for well-being in a high performance elite sport environment. You're lucky to be there. You're lucky to be in the sport. You of course put absolutely every single ounce of you into it, and of course you're going to be wrung out and stretched and stressed. It's Formula One, of course it's like that. That's the sort of attitude that might prevail in parts. I think to navigate that, you need to come up with your narrative. So how you talk about well-being, and really bespoke and align it with whatever your business and whatever your industry is. So in Formula One speak, or in any elite high performance environment, it's helping people to understand what it isn't. So I think you can almost address the eye roll, cynical opinions up front, transparently, and
Yeah.
say, when I mention well-being, I'm not talking about everybody downing tools at 5 p.m. and going home bang on time every day. I'm not talking about a suite of well-being benefits even, or perks. Not talking about 4-day working weeks. Like, all those things could be part of the well-being strategy, but that's not the concept we're talking about here. What we're talking about is people having a sense of purpose, belonging, connection at work. So ultimately, the one liner that I've tried to use is well-being doesn't replace dedication, commitment, and hard work. It unlocks it. So there's an intrinsic link between people being well and healthy and performing at their best. And that, if you can start to pull on that thread, you almost make it non-negotiable. You can't argue. You can't
Yeah.
argue with the points. And in our world, you can start to therefore link the well-being topic with competitive performance and competitive advantage. If you get well-being right and you trailblaze on it, you could be quicker on the track than your rivals in a year or two time. That's when you're starting to speak
Yeah.
the language of senior leaders. So I think there's that piece. And once you've found that narrative and you've been given the permission to start talking about it, you can start to weave together all the little things you want to do under your well-being strategy, but with that real signposting language
Yeah.
over all of it. And then just quickly on the once you're delivering to people, so let's say you've been given, yeah, that sounds good, go and deliver sessions and talks and things to our population. The cynicism doesn't end with the senior leadership team. I've delivered sessions both at Williams and elsewhere where you've got people in the room cross-armed thinking, I've heard all this before, it doesn't mean anything to me. So again, I think you just need to think carefully, never talk generically, always think, how can I talk about this and present this information in a way that's going to make these people tick?
Mm-hmm.
And these people might be different depending on the department they're from, even within your organization. It might not be one language fits all. And one example I can use is data. So at Williams, you can imagine there's lots of people with brains the size of a house, really, really ultra intelligent data analysts, engineers, aerodynamicists, way more intelligent than me. But they appreciate hearing the data. I think William, when he spoke up front, mentioned that you can get, a bit nerdy with this topic, but if your audience is up for that, then use it.
Yeah.
So I'll often talk about the science of stress and what's actually happening within you in terms of the hormones that it involves. I love using the example. I delivered a session recently where everyone had a load of pizza for lunch.
Yeah.
And I use that example to demonstrate, what's going on in your body right now with your blood sugar and the fact it probably might make you feel a bit sleepy.
Killjoy.
Exactly. But good point, Claire, because again, I think it's important not to preach. So I use the example of the science and said, this is what's going on. And you could see people interested in it. But what I made sure I didn't say was, so never have pizza again. My point was, if you do have pizza, understand what it will do to you. And if in 2 hours time you're feeling a bit rubbish, just acknowledge and embrace the choice that you made.
And sometimes just knowing that that's why is really helpful as well. I was running a workshop yesterday and we were all checking in on our emotions, and one woman said the best answer. She went, I feel very happy, but also very sleepy because I had a great lunch, and that is the cause for both of those things. And it was like, yes, it's like understanding some of that stuff that happens, and building on when you were speaking, it made me think of a couple of things. One of them around that psychological safety piece, and I talk a lot about psychological safety, and some people will be more familiar than others, but psychological safety, Google did a study in 2012 called Project Aristotle, where they studied about 100 teams over 2 years, and they were trying to identify what drives performance in teams. And they looked at things like charismatic leadership, they looked at things like clear direction, team cohesion, communications, and they couldn't actually find anything that had a clear direct link to team performance. And then they discovered this paper on psychological safety, and they said, okay, well, let's try and see what psychological safety, whether that drives team performance. And they found that it was like by far the strongest driver of team performance out of all the things they'd looked at. So you don't necessarily have to be. Often we think, okay, let's put some perks out there. It would be great to give people an app or some training. And while those things can be nice, they are often they are alleviating symptoms, right? It's like, we're giving you this app to help you be mindful to deal with your stress, the stress that we have caused you. And it's actually going, what can we do to think about our cultures and our behaviors and our ways of working so that we're not causing you that stress? And I even though I have done so much stuff and I've worked in house when it comes to doing well-being, I can get quite cynical around perks because I think that's lovely, but if I wanted Headspace, I would buy Headspace myself. Actually, can I have a boss that is going to actually understand me and I'm going to feel safe to be able to speak up to? Can I feel that I'm able to ask for something that I need, that I'm going to be able to have those adjustments, that the way in which we're running meetings means that they're inclusive for everybody, whether they have disabilities, whether they are shy at speaking up. There's so many different ways in which I would rather people focus their time and energy when it comes to improving a culture than the perks that alleviate the symptoms. And so it's like, what can you actually do with the day-to-day behaviors and things like psychological safety, which is about creating creating space for people to disagree, for people to say, oh, actually, I think there's something we could do differently, or from my experience, I've seen this done a different way, or this doesn't work for me, or actually, this is hurting me. And what can we do to intentionally create space for that? And often you can talk about psychological safety in quite a theoretical way, but it's like, actually, what do you practically do to bring psychological safety into day-to-day work? And last week I did a keynote on psychological safety for a group of orthopedic and neurosurgeons. So I was like, brain surgeons. I was like, I don't know why they think I've got anything to teach them. But it's like, actually having psychological safety when you've got so much at stake, so much at risk, when it can be so important to make sure that people can say, actually, I've seen an issue here, or I've seen a risk here, and for people to feel safe to speak up. And it can be as simple as saying, how do we bring in our team meetings, in our one-to-ones, in our daily interactions, space for us to say, I think there might be something wrong here, or I dissent, I disagree. I've worked with people in the past, and a great way of doing that was just going, let's have a gut check here. What do you think? What do you think might work here? What do you think might go wrong here? What are some of the obstacles you can see as being risks? And making it that it's part of the normal day to day that people disagree and that people challenge, rather than it feeling like the idea that if you said something that was wrong, or you challenge, that you're that person who's like put their head above the parapet. I think that's the right one, right phrase. And that you might get, like, that might be held against you. There might be a black mark against you. So it's like, how do you bring some of this stuff into just normalized day-to-day behaviors, so that people then feel safe to be able to do that? And the knock-on effect is, when we're talking about space to rest or to recover, is saying, actually, I think we're at risk of messing this up because we're not in the right headspace. We can't focus on this properly. And we know that next week we really have to be upping our game. So right now, perhaps let's deprioritize this, and let's take some space to be able to rest, or even just focus on something different and have that time before we ramp up again.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I was disappeared. It was a power cut. We did say it was going to happen with the wind, and it did happen. I can't believe it.
Luckily you had us to keep going.
Well, I didn't. I don't need to be here. It's fascinating. I literally forgot I was a host just now because I was so into listening to you. I thought I meant to be doing something here. So didn't want to break up the flow there because it's been really fascinating. Yeah, both of what you said, and I think I was just looking at some of the questions coming through. I think someone knows you, Luke, and they have basically put a couple of questions. Well, and I think she's probably put two questions there, which we've kind of answered, like, how do the biggest challenge of how to connect wellbeing initiatives with measurable performance outcomes. So I suppose is, how do you hitch the two, that actually they are completely connected? And the kind of, I love that expression you say, Luke, about it unlocks it. Well-being unlocks performance. And so it's not as though it's in getting in the way of performance at all. It's actually enhancing it. So probably being answered. But one thing she has said, and I think it's quite important, and it may be you've just answered that, Claire, with the psychological safety, is, if you could only pick one thing to implement within a team to have the greatest impact, what would that be? Luke, can I come to you?
Yeah, and actually a reflection on what Claire was saying tallies with this question. So I completely agree. Psychological safety is so huge, but it's difficult, isn't it? It's not something you can implement on a day. It takes time and needs nurturing, and it needs people to support it from bottom up, top down, etc. It's a complex thing to create. One thing that so you take an easy way out to answer that question would be psychological safety. But I think you need to break it down and take a few steps back. And something I've seen work really well, and some people might wince at this, but I think if done well, it has a place, is a team charter style approach, which, if created with the team itself, not done to the team, so it's a real interactive exercise which can be cathartic in itself in creating psychological safety. You look to create, 5 to 10 really clear bullet points on how a team operates and treats each other. And in there, you can have things around the safety to speak up and disagree in a constructive way. You can have stuff around recognition, feedback in the moment. You can also have basic things like meeting etiquette, making sure that there are agendas before meetings, making sure people take actions and ownership away with them. So the reason I caveat it saying some people might wince is because I've been part of team charter creation sessions that are a bit tick boxy. And you feel like the outputs aren't ever actually going to make a difference. I think if done well, if properly facilitated, and people have a voice and they are part of shaping the charter, and then importantly, you share that charter and it becomes a living, breathing thing that you hold each other to account to. That can be a brilliant step towards creating psychological safety plus efficiency. You can talk about the things that preferred communication methods. There might be people in the team who need an hour before a meeting to prepare, who don't like being called in the moment to be asked a question. Surface that stuff, find out what personalities you've got in the team as part of that charter, and then make it an inclusive thing. So bit of a long-winded answer, but a team charter can be a great way of encompassing quite a lot of crucial key things that you would want to achieve as a group of people.
And just before I ask Claire the same question, Luke, when you do that charter, do you have to refresh it as new people come in? Because obviously there's a churn of people coming along, and something done with the team a year later may be a very different team, and they're thinking, oh, what's this? I've got nothing to do with it. So is that something that is live and ongoing?
Absolutely. And I think you can use it to induct and onboard new starters. That this is our way of working, because it's brilliant for that new starter, because they get an instant resource that they can start to feel, okay, this is the culture here, rather than nervously tiptoeing around for a month trying to work out what makes people tick. So it's a great resource for them. And then in terms of making sure it's live and relevant, absolutely would recommend it's reviewed at least once a year, if not more often. You literally present your 5 or 10 commandments. They're not commandments, but that's an easy way of describing them. And just making sure that they still apply and they still feel right based on the context that you're operating in. So absolutely a live document that you need to onboard people into as they join.
Brilliant. Claire, how would you answer that?
So I think I'm just going to talk about a way in which you can build on that is almost like being able to have a more open conversation about people's boundaries as well. And when I say boundaries, sometimes people eye roll and say, well, we can't all say, well, I'm not doing that and I'm not doing that. And it's like, that's not what boundaries need to be in the workplace. It's about saying, to get the best out of me, these are some of the things I need, and these are some of the things that actually stifle my performance. So being able to say, what are some of the things that you really ask us as a team to get the best out of you, and how can we include that as part of the charter or as part of the understanding, I think is really important. I am also going to, as Luke was talking, I was screen grabbing something which I'll share in the chat, which is I hope it will share in the chat, which is, it's called the Braving Inventory, and it's by Brené Brown, who is a researcher. If you've not heard of Brené Brown, look her up. She does incredible TED Talks and lots of talking around how to create cultures and leadership and leading with authenticity. And the Braving Inventory is a set of behaviors that help build trust. So they are boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, which means like confidentiality, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And I think this is often a really good way of giving your team a bit of a sense check on how strong your trust is within your team, because trust is one-to-one individual, and psychological safety is as a team. What is that trust within that team? So thinking about me as a leader, how well am I displaying these behaviors? If people were to score me on these behaviors, what do I think they would score me? How are we with each other? How does this sit in terms of our culture? And you will always have areas that you're better at or worse at. There are things that come more naturally or don't come as naturally, but being able to sense check that and go, actually, I think that I am quite judgmental when it comes to people saying, oh, I can't do that. I think, oh, why can't they do that? Or they're telling me something. So that's something that I need to think about. What is one behavior that I can do to help nudge that to increase that trust? Because I think we often get overwhelmed and say, oh, I've got to implement this whole new program. I've got to shift this culture entirely, rather than saying, what's one thing I could do differently? And by using something like the Brené Brown Braving Inventory, it gives you a sense of where should I start and what can I dial up, and what's something that perhaps I'm not great at, but someone else in the team is great at, so I can leverage them and lean on them. So it's a good way to be able to start with that. Let me see if I can just pop it in the chat so that people can
Yeah,
see it.
that's great. That's
Yeah,
really helpful, Claire. If you could,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
fantastic. Now we've only got 10 minutes, and there's so many other things to discuss. So we could go on for ages. But I think there's a Sharmila, thank you for joining us from South Africa.
Oh,
That is
nice.
great. But what you said is, and I kind of think we've been kind of talking around this, but perhaps being a bit specific. How do you create a well-being strategy? And that's interesting. She's saying a strategy, because that can be a tick box. And she said, not as a tick box approach, but weave it into the organization's actions. And
Hmm.
I think we can all say, here's our strategy, here's a bit of paper, and that's what we're going to deliver. And then another question is then, how do you actually measure, how do you know whether your team are actually operating in survival mode? And I think the two are probably kind of connected there. So perhaps to start, whoever wants to doing is, how do you create a strategy, but not as a tick box approach? And is that the right term? Is a well-being strategy the right term, or is it, is that perhaps in itself making it a little bit remote from the rest of the organization's actions? Who wants to take that one?
I think I think it depends on your organization, and who you need to kind of buy into stuff. I often think that well-being strategy then can make it feel quite siloed from other stuff. And a question I like to think about when I'm thinking about how do you get stakeholders involved is what keeps this person up at night. So what keeps the CEO up at night? Uh, I'm sure that it's not, oh my gosh, what is the well-being of my people is not what's waking a CEO up at 3 a.m. It's what's the share price, what's my market percentage, how am I doing against my competitors? So how do you make sure that your well-being strategy is feeding into the overall business objectives? And what is your overall business goals? What are your overall business characteristics and vision and behaviors that you want to see? And then it's like, how can we invest our time and our energy and potentially budget into making sure that the well-being of our people is unlocking and driving these metrics? So it can be a standalone strategy, but I think it really needs to be very much tied in to your overall business strategy. Otherwise, it is something that can really easily be lifted out or just kind of isn't that relevant. And I have lots of stuff that I can share on this. I do lots of kind of step by step. If you're starting from scratch, this is what you can do when it comes to building a wellbeing strategy. So I can definitely share some of that stuff. But a couple of tips are, don't try and do everything at once. Like, what are some of the biggest issues that you see time and time again when it comes through things like the employee engagement survey? What's the demographic of your people? So that can give you a bit of an insight into what your people need. And what is it that you're really trying to achieve over the next few years, and what can you do to help invest in that? Because it's not about going, I want to tick all these boxes and do all of these things. It's saying, what is the actual overall goal, and what is the thing I'm trying to shift? Because then that's a lot easier to measure as well, because you know what you're actually trying to shift. Because it's very, very hard to measure the well-being of people in an accurate way, because there are so many different factors that impact that. And to say, oh, we've made these people have a higher well-being, well, who knows what's causing that? And you can suddenly go, well, there's a cost of living crisis. Well, that's not our fault, but that's really impacted our scores. And so therefore now the measurements mean that we look like we're failing with our strategy when that's not the case. So it's about taking a step back and thinking, what is it that you really want to achieve as an organization? And then how can investing in well-being make that a reality?
But you're on mute, William.
And then we're going to have a very quick answer the next question, which I want to give, and then we'll be running out of time. So Luke, on that one, what else would you yeah.
Yeah, I mean, total alignment with Claire. I think starting with strategic alignment is key. So making sure that you're weaving it together. I think there probably are some metrics. So data is critical. So if you can show that an investment in well-being has led to a reduction in absenteeism, an increase in retention, an increase in various well-being related metrics like a feeling of belonging at work, a sense of purpose, those things, rather than I'm sleeping well and my diet is good, which is very hard to control, then yeah, you can start to link, well, these teams are scoring very high on these metrics and their productivity and their performance is high. That's where you can start to draw the data ontology, as our team principal likes to talk about, and I had no idea what it meant until yesterday. But you can start to make the connection between well-being and performance metrics.
Brilliant. Ontology, I thought that was to do with teeth, but that may not be that may not be right. So just on the last question, and I think it kind of everyone's got different personalities. You're, Luke, more in a male-dominated environment there. So we've got the senior leadership team absolutely on board. We've even got the middle management on board, and now we've got to get it down to the those who are doing all the stuff at the work at the coalface there, and they're saying, well, this is all I'm stronger than that. I don't need all this stuff. So is there a block? And how do we adapt it for those who really are a little bit more, I wouldn't say fragile, but more sensitive to some of the things that are going on? Others are as tough as anything. And there's a fantastic book called The Dandelion and the Orchid of different personalities. The orchids are
Yeah.
terribly fragile, but incredibly productive and hugely creative. And the dandelions, you could just knock them down, they bounce back up again.
They
I mean,
grow through cement.
yes, they've got, and that's a book about, different personalities within a family, but here in the workforce, we've got it. So it's really just how do we land it at the grassroots, couple of 1 minute in each, to make sure that it's adaptable for different people.
Yeah, sure. Go on, Claire, you go.
I was just going to say, and this could be a whole separate conversation on inclusion, and I think that's why you don't want to prescribe this is what you all need because this is what we think you need. It's saying that we want to create an environment, a psychologically safe environment, where people feel able to say what they need and they are able to put in the boundaries that they need and they're able to take the things that they need, and that you are offering a variety of different interventions and support so that you are so that there are things that are available for different people, because there will not, two people who might seem on paper so alike might need completely different things from an organization. So it's making sure that that is available and that they have the empowerment to be able to say that and ask for it.
Perfect. Thanks
Yeah,
very much, Luke.
completely agree with that. And again, I think the challenge of a male-dominated environment is a real one. And I think it goes back to what we've spoken about already in terms of tailoring your message to the environment that they are in. So if I'm delivering a well-being related session to our factory workers who spend 9 to 5 every day, literally building parts of Formula One cars, I would definitely tailor my messaging slightly differently to back office, finance, HR, and link it again to high performance. Make it almost indisputable that well-being is an important thing.
Yeah.
Don't preach. Don't tell people you must be meditating every 5 minutes every day. You instantly turn off the room in some circumstances, but give them a list of things that they can then look at and think, light bulb moment, that might work for me. And that's a win. If one person takes one thing from a list of 20 possibles because you've pitched it in the right way, then you've succeeded.
Brilliant. Both of you, thank you so much. Absolute gold dust, that is. That really is. It's been fantastic. And you've got that total experience in all those companies that you've been working in. So I'll just say thank you both so much. Do make any connections if you want to follow up. Please get hold of us at Roots Health Academy. You've put in, Claire, that braving infantry, which is great.
Yeah.
And please, we'll make sure that there's some connections, and we'll do this again at some point, perhaps in the new year, and really look forward to it. So to everyone who's come, thank you very much for listening. You held on right way through to the end. So appreciate
Thank you.
So thanks everyone there, and hopefully let other people know when we go into next year and do it again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.